For decades, fans of the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family believed they knew everything about the iconic teen idols who defined a generation. Maureen McCormick and David Cassidy, two of television's most beloved faces, were often the subject of fan speculation, tabloid gossip, and teenage dreams. Behind the glossy magazine covers and bubbly smiles, however, there was a story left untold. A story of secret crushes, emotional chaos, and a painful disconnect that neither star publicly explored, until now. At 69, Maureen McCormick has finally broken her silence about her relationship with David Cassidy, and what she reveals is not only touching but also tragic. It's a truth that challenges everything fans thought they knew, and it paints a much more human picture of two stars who lived under the weight of fame, expectations, and unspoken feelings. This isn't just a tale of love and loss. This is a story of missed chances, emotional scars, and the unfiltered reality behind the TV dream. In the glittering world of 1970s television, where teen idols were manufactured in studios and fan clubs exploded overnight, Maureen McCormick was living what looked like a charmed life. As Marcia Brady on the Brady Bunch, she was the poster girl for wholesome American adolescence, blonde, bright, and perfectly put together. Millions of fans tuned in weekly to watch her navigate teenage life with charm and composure. But behind the polished image, Maureen was a young woman battling insecurities, loneliness, and a longing she could never quite explain. At the center of that longing was someone who seemed just as untouchable as the fantasy she was paid to sell, David Cassidy. David wasn't just another actor. He was the teen idol of the era, star of the Partridge Family, a multi-platinum selling singer, and a heartthrob whose face adorned the bedroom walls of nearly every teenage girl in America. But to Maureen, David was something more. He was a beacon. A symbol of the kind of connection she craved, someone who might understand the pressures of child stardom, the weight of constantly being on, and the gnawing emptiness that fame couldn't fill. They met officially at a television event, one of many where stars from sister shows were herded together for photo ops and press junkets. David walked in like a storm wrapped in a smile, confident, charismatic, and disarmingly handsome. Maureen, though used to being around celebrities, felt her breath catch. "I was absolutely captivated," she admitted decades later. There was something about him, like he was lit from within. What began as admiration quickly evolved into a full-blown crush. But it wasn't just superficial. She saw something else in him, something quiet and sad that mirrored her own internal chaos. Maureen found herself looking for excuses to be near him. She'd ask mutual friends about his schedule, try to sit near him during group events, and dream endlessly about a moment when he might see her the same way. But David, already overwhelmed by his own sudden fame, remained distant. Friendly, but removed. There were fleeting moments, shared glances, a laugh at an inside joke, a lingering look backstage. For Maureen, those tiny interactions felt monumental. But they weren't enough. "I used to hope he'd look at me the way he looked at the girls in the magazines," she later wrote. But he never did. David, constantly surrounded by screaming fans and under immense pressure from managers and media, seemed to keep a wall around himself. And Maureen, still learning how to navigate her own fame, didn't have the courage to scale it. She convinced herself it was just a silly crush, that he was too famous, too busy, too unreachable. Yet, despite her efforts to push it aside, her feelings only deepened. And that longing began to hurt. "It wasn't just that he didn't love me back," she explained. "It was that I didn't feel seen." In a world where everyone adored her on screen, she felt invisible in the ways that mattered. David Cassidy had become the focal point of her emotional confusion, a person who represented all the intimacy and validation she desperately sought but never received. Over time, the crush turned into a quiet sadness. Maureen began to understand that David wasn't trying to hurt her, he simply wasn't in a place to notice her pain. He was drowning in his own. And perhaps, if circumstances were different, they might have found solace in one another. But as the years passed and their careers took separate paths, Maureen was left with only memories, bittersweet, fragile, and unresolved. Even today, she doesn't describe it as unrequited love or heartbreak. It was something more subtle, more haunting, a missed connection in a world that rarely allows for real, human emotion. "I never told him how I felt," she confessed. "And I'll always wonder if he felt the same, even just a little." While the world saw David Cassidy as the epitome of cool, the shaggy-haired teen idol with a dazzling smile and voice that could melt hearts, Maureen McCormick saw something else. Something darker. Something that mirrored the private pain she carried behind her own picture-perfect exterior. Beneath the glittering lights and polished magazine covers, both were quietly unraveling, each in their own way. David was drowning in expectations he never asked for, and Maureen was suffocating under the weight of being America's sweetheart. The tragedy? They were two young souls standing inches apart, yet utterly alone. Their careers had launched them into the stratosphere at lightning speed. While David was performing to sold-out arenas and topping music charts, Maureen was taping back-to-back episodes of The Brady Bunch, smiling endlessly for the cameras, and navigating the relentless scrutiny of the press. But as their public images soared, their private lives began to collapse. David once admitted in interviews that he felt like a product, a brand crafted for consumption rather than an artist or a person. Maureen understood that feeling intimately. "We were both trapped in roles," she later said. "He had to be David Cassidy, the pop god. I had to be Marcia Brady, the perfect girl. And neither of us really knew how to be ourselves." They would cross paths at industry events, award shows, charity galas, always in the company of handlers, producers, and flashbulbs. From the outside, it looked like a glamorous whirlwind. But in truth, there was rarely any room for genuine connection. When they did get a moment to talk, their conversations were fleeting, surface level. David was often quiet, withdrawn. Maureen, though outwardly bubbly, was paralyzed by self-doubt. "I wanted to tell him how I felt so many times," she admitted, "but I was afraid of rejection. And I think he was afraid of being vulnerable." By the mid-70s, both stars were facing demons they could no longer hide. David had grown disillusioned with his fame. The crowds that once electrified him began to feel like a cage. He started pulling back from public life, making headlines for cancelled concerts, erratic behavior, and a growing sense of discontent. "I was exhausted," he confessed in a rare interview. "I didn't know who I was anymore." At the same time, Maureen was spiraling into depression and drug use, hiding it from even those closest to her. Fame had made them idols. But it had also made them isolated, exhausted, and emotionally stranded. And yet, Maureen couldn't stop thinking about David. Not as the icon, but as the person. She saw the cracks in his armor, the flickers of sadness behind his eyes, the way he seemed to be performing even when the cameras weren't rolling. She wanted to reach out, to ask him if he was okay, to share that she too was silently suffering. But she never did. "I think we were both afraid of being seen for who we really were," she later reflected. Because when the world loves a version of you that isn't real, it's terrifying to reveal the truth. The industry didn't make space for emotional honesty. Vulnerability was a liability. And in those days, therapy, mental health, and support systems were rarely discussed, especially for young stars expected to have it all. So, Maureen and David kept playing their parts, each believing they had to suffer in silence to protect the illusion. What might have happened if one of them had broken that silence? If Maureen had told David how she felt? If David had opened up about his struggles instead of burying them? We'll never know. Their story isn't one of love lost, but of connection missed. It's about how two people, so close and yet worlds apart, were never able to share the one thing that might have saved them, truth. Looking back, Maureen admits that she wishes she had reached out. Not to start a romance or rekindle a friendship, but simply to say, "I see you." Because sometimes, that's all we really need. Not adoration. Not fame. Just to be seen. And David Cassidy, for all the lights and screaming fans, may have never truly felt that. Not in the way that mattered. When news broke in November 2017 that David Cassidy had died at the age of 67, the world mourned the loss of a musical icon and television legend. Fans who had once wallpapered their bedrooms with his face shared memories online, remembering the concerts, the albums, the voice. But for Maureen McCormick, the grief was deeper. It wasn't just about losing a former co-star or industry peer, it was about losing someone she had quietly carried in her heart for decades. And it was about losing the chance to ever say the things she never found the courage to voice when he was alive. For days, Maureen stayed silent. She didn't immediately post a tribute or speak to reporters. Because her grief wasn't for the David Cassidy the public had known, it was for the boy behind the fame. The one she had watched unravel over the years, the one who had seemed so invincible in his youth but so fragile as the years went on. She mourned the boy who had never known how much he mattered to her, not as a teen idol, but as a person. And that, she would later reveal, was a regret she might carry forever. Eventually, she did speak. In an emotional interview, Maureen opened up in a way she never had before. "There were things I never told him," she said softly. "And I wish I had. I really wish I had." She spoke not of a romantic affair or some long-hidden love story, but of a deeper emotional bond she had always hoped to build but never did. For Maureen, David symbolized a chapter of her life marked by confusion, pressure, and the unbearable loneliness of early fame. He was, in many ways, the only person who might have understood what she was going through. And yet, they had never truly connected beyond a few passing moments. "I think we were both hurting," she said. "But we didn't know how to talk about it." In the years after their respective shows had ended, their lives had taken dramatically different paths. David struggled with addiction, financial troubles, and eventually public humiliation as his personal demons became tabloid fodder. Maureen, too, faced her own spiral, battling drug use, bulimia, and mental health issues before finding her way to recovery. Though they were rarely in touch, Maureen kept track of David's journey from a distance. Each headline about his arrests, each confession in an interview, felt like a painful echo of what might have been if someone, anyone, had stepped in earlier. What haunted Maureen the most was that she had seen the warning signs early on. She had felt the sadness behind his eyes, sensed the weight he carried even in his most charming moments. But like so many others, she said nothing. "I kept waiting for the right time," she admitted. And then suddenly, there wasn't any time left. When David revealed shortly before his death that he was suffering from dementia, it was like a cruel final twist in a life already marred by suffering. But Maureen was struck by something even more heartbreaking, his final public words. "So much wasted time," David reportedly said on his deathbed. That one sentence pierced Maureen's heart. Because it mirrored everything she felt, too. So much wasted time. So many unspoken words. So many chances to say, "I care," that were lost in fear, silence, and the chaos of celebrity life. Since his passing, Maureen has chosen to honor David not by focusing on his struggles, but by remembering the light he brought to millions, and the light she saw in him even when he couldn't see it himself. "He had this incredible soul," she said. "He was more than the teen idol. He was sensitive, funny, complicated, and beautiful. I just wish I had told him that." Sometimes, the deepest pain isn't in love lost, but in the love that was never spoken. Maureen's regret is a quiet one, but it echoes with truth. She didn't want fame. She didn't want a tabloid headline. She just wanted one more moment. To look David in the eye and say, "You mattered to me." And now, all she can do is say it to the world, hoping somehow, he hears it wherever he is. At 69 years old, Maureen McCormick no longer wears the mask of Marsha Brady. That iconic smile, the one that once lit up millions of television screens, has softened into something more reflective, more grounded. She no longer lives for red carpets, press junkets, or the approval of studio executives. These days, she speaks with the clarity of someone who has weathered storms, survived herself, and emerged not as a starlet, but as a full human being. And with that clarity comes the courage to finally say the things she kept buried for far too long. Especially the truth about David Cassidy. For decades, Maureen stayed silent, not out of shame or secrecy, but because she believed her story wasn't important. Who would care, she used to think. But with age comes perspective. And in recent years, she's realized that speaking the truth, especially about the people who shaped her life, is not just healing, it's necessary. It's not about scandal, she said in a recent podcast appearance. It's about honoring someone who meant something to me. And honoring the part of myself that needed to say it out loud. Her truth about David isn't romantic in the way fans might imagine. There was no torrid affair, no dramatic breakup. What Maureen shares instead is a story of emotional longing, of quiet understanding, of a missed opportunity for two young people navigating fame too early, too fast. She describes David not as a crush or a fantasy, but as a mirror. We were both thrown into the deep end of celebrity when we were still trying to figure out who we were, she said. And I always felt, deep down, that he understood that. Even if we never talked about it. In her memoir and recent interviews, Maureen has reflected on the times they crossed paths. How she would steal glances at him across a room, how their brief exchanges always seemed to carry an unspoken weight. She admits now that she hoped, even then, that David might one day pull her aside and say, "I see you." Not the actress, not the character. You. But he never did. And Maureen never had the nerve to say it either. Not until now. At this point in her life, Maureen no longer needs validation. She doesn't want fame. What she wants is honesty, and peace. There were so many things I didn't understand when I was young, she says. About myself. About David. About what we both were going through. But hindsight, as they say, is everything. Looking back, she sees just how much pain David was in. The drinking. The legal troubles. The public unraveling. She knows now that fame never gave him the freedom it promised. It only trapped him in a persona he could never escape. And that's why Maureen speaks now. Because too many young stars are still suffering in silence. Because too many stories like David's end in tragedy. And because if she can shine a light on even one misunderstood soul, maybe it helps make sense of her own. He was more than a poster on a wall, she says. He was human. He struggled. He mattered. In the years since his passing, Maureen has made peace with her memories. She's no longer haunted by the silence between them. Instead, she holds on to the tenderness, the way he laughed, the kindness in his voice when they did speak, the unspoken bond of two people who knew what it meant to be looked at by millions but truly seen by none. She hopes, in some way, that David knows she's speaking now. That wherever he is, he feels understood. Finally. And perhaps that's the real truth Maureen McCormick wanted to tell. That behind every pop culture icon is a real person with wounds, doubts, and stories never told. That sometimes, love doesn't look like a romance, it looks like empathy. And that even decades later, it's never too late to say, you were seen. You were loved. You were never alone.